Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. This is the main show. You heard that right. The main show. It is back. We're back on our normal schedule. I'm Manu and he's Stefan Bienkowski. This is not our first free show of the summer, right, Stefan? Because we did one last week, but it is our first main show. We're getting there. We're about 5 days away from the season to kick off. It's exciting. Feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps unlike other major leagues, German football kicked off with a Super Cup this weekend. I guess a bit like some leagues, obviously they have their Super Cups before the leagues kick off, but we also had quite a long list of fixtures in the German Cup as well. So it's the start of the Bundesliga, but I think people have already had a nice taster of what's to come. And yeah, today just feels like the perfect opportunity to do a preview of sorts of the Bundesliga. We're going to do the top half of the table today. The second half will be coming out on Thursday. And we'll make that episode free for all subscribers. Free for all listeners, rather, not all subscribers. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait for the league to kick off.
Yeah, I'm really excited, especially because we got such a nice appetizer, I guess is a good word to describe it, on Saturday. Where the absolute opposite of what everyone in a red shirt was hoping for, Stefan, happened. They really spoiled the party for poor Harry Kane. We'll have to wait until at least next year to finally win his first club title. Not what was in store at all, or what was hoped for by all the Bayern supporters. And I think we have to talk about this game in particular, and we'll kick off a lot of our conversations with this game. But as you mentioned, like this preview, what we're essentially going to do is title challenges, right? European challengers, and then later this week we're going to do all the relegation candidates. So if you're wondering what the structure is, so it's going to be quite a long show with a lot of details. So I guess we should jump in as quickly as possible. Maybe just do a quick break for our advertisers who make this show possible. So we'll be right back. This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games, available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, BELIEVE, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. So yeah, Stefan, the Super Cup. As I alluded to, Harry Kane will have to wait a little longer for his first title. There's a lot to take away from this game, and I think I had two main takeaways. And the one takeaway is that Harry Kane will not fix all of Bayern Munich's problems. Far from it. I think he's a wonderful addition, and I think we can talk about that a bit. And we actually did talk about it in the bonus show last week, right? I think that he is a player that will make this team better, but I don't think he's going to address many of the needs that Bayern Munich have still going into the season, and probably going to take them some time to fix. We went to the press conference where they introduced Harry Kane officially on, I think it was on Sunday. These days are all blurred into one. And Jan Christian Dresen, the CEO of Bayern, basically admitted that they were close to signing Kepa, and then Courtois tore his ACL, and Real Madrid came in, and Kepa is Spanish, so of course, that option was gone. And then the second option was Rulli from Ajax Amsterdam. He hurt his shoulder. He's out for many months, so that option is gone now too. So no goalkeeper, still no number 6. Potentially need a right back too. It just feels like this team doesn't have the cohesiveness and the structure it needs. And my second takeaway is that despite all the key players that Leipzig lost, they actually look better than last year, which is remarkable. So those were my two big main takeaways. And I think for certain we've seen two of the potential. I mean, Bayern is always a title favorite, but I'm pretty sure Leipzig is one too. What do you think?
Yeah, it was a really interesting game. I had some friends over on Saturday actually, and we watched it over a couple of beers. And they're used to kind of watching the Premier League, some Scottish football, and when they were asking about it, because I said, hey, we should stick this game on, I want to watch it. Like, of course, I kind of said it should be a fun, open match because these Super Cup games usually are, and I mean that's exactly what it was. I don't think anyone was really expecting Leipzig to kind of really go so well as they did, for lack of a better expression. And I just thought they were really impressive, not only in the way they kind of scored goals and created chances, but also in the way they kind of were very, regimented in the way they kind of sat quite deep and were really happy to hit on the break. Danny Olmo was a perfect example of that, but just about every player in that team kind of knew what they were doing, how to play their role, how to play off one another. I mean, the fact that Openda and Werner have only had like a handful of games together, and Werner knows where to run, Openda is kind of getting the hang of it. Danny Olmo looked like a man reborn because he suddenly had the freedom of the final third to play in, where Nkunku and maybe Szoboszlai kind of took those roles off him, or that space off him last year, and boy did he kind of make up for it, or compensate for them rather. And I just kind of felt like Bayern were the opposite, to be perfectly honest with you. I think, I wrote my newsletter on this last week, and I did kind of feel a little smug as I was watching the game, thinking, well, at least it's not entirely out of date following the signing of Harry Kane, because I think a lot of the points I made in it were still pertinent. And, my concern for Bayern is that, there's defensive issues there, there's goalkeeping issues there, which, before the end of the month, may or will be sorted. They might sign a new right back, they might sign a better goalkeeper. Obviously, going forward, Kim's probably going to take Upamecano's role, who I thought had another really, really poor game. Just the way that Upamecano was playing just continues to baffle me. I was watching the game with my friend, who's actually a Rangers fan, but we were talking about how he reminded me of a player at Celtic, Efe Ambrose, who I only bring this up because I remember a Celtic manager said he's the best defender on the pitch for 89 minutes of a game, and then
that's brutal.
That's
a brutal statement.
And then he says, from time to time there's like 1 minute of madness which just completely kind of ruins it, and that reminds me of Upamecano a lot, actually, in the sense that on paper he's tremendous, but he just has these moments where he just kind of completely lets himself down. I thought Kim, even despite a lack of game time, when he came on, I think he made a huge difference. So I can see, I can understand why him and De Ligt would be a perfectly fine partnership going forward, but we're still not sure what's going to happen at right back. I thought Mazraoui looked better when he came on than Pavard, But then that kind of bleeds into the issues up front as well. And I do kind of worry for Bayern in an attacking sense as well, because, they've got Kane, and, Kane's going to kind of fix a lot of their issues, and maybe he'll provide a focal point that the rest of the team can play off, because, you can talk about Matthias Tel missing chances, and I think that's an important thing to note, because, when you're a Bayern striker, you have to take your chances. But the thing that concerned me more was just the manner in which you had Gnabry, Musiala and Sané all just kind of running into each other, struggling to take advantage of space. Gnabry, again, plays well for 10 or 15 minutes a game and just goes completely quiet for the rest of it. I'm not quite sure why. Doesn't really have a great understanding of Davies, I feel, at times, where, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like they're making the most of the talent that they all clearly have. And maybe having Harry Kane there as the focal point, like Lewandowski was, allows these players to kind of, fit back into more traditional roles going forward, I guess. But I was really disappointed in Musiala in particular because we're expecting big things from him this season. Carried that team on his shoulders for much of last season, and he's finally had a rest. He's had a pre-season. You think he'd be raring to go, but it was Danny Olmo who stole the show in that game, wasn't it? And I don't know. I think. I was looking at in our forum, and someone had made a thread for this game, and the Bayern fans in it were apoplectic, to be honest with you, for lack of a better word. People calling for Tuchel's head, concerns that nothing's changed since last season. And if you put aside the players who've arrived, which I think are all good signings so far, I can completely understand their concerns, because that team played against Leipzig on Saturday the way it played for much of the second half of last season, which wasn't good enough.
Yeah. First of all, I want to apologize because I did see this thread, but I didn't really contribute because there was a lot going on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I mean, I was up until 2 a.m., 3:30 a.m. waiting for the Kane confirmation, right? That he's finally signed his contract, and the madness pretty much continued straight through Saturday, Sunday. So sorry for not contributing as much, but I did see some of the comments, and of course I was there to hear Thomas Tuchel speak after the game about that he doesn't really understand what was going on, which in the press here in Munich did not go over well, Stefan, at all, because it's his job to know what's going on, right? It's his job to understand what the issues are, and the fact that he made this comment really didn't sit well. The other comment that didn't really sit well is that he apologized to Harry Kane because he said, like, well, it looks like the team hasn't been training for 4 weeks. Well, Thomas, that's your job. And the team hasn't. The team did look like a team that didn't train over the last 4 weeks. In fairness, I mean, he's right about that. But, I mean, again, it's his job to make sure that it isn't like that, right? And while it is nice of him to be so truthful, it wasn't maybe the statements, you know how the Munich press is, Stefan, it did not come across very well. And the thing is, what kind of I have lots of thoughts about this game when it comes to Bayern, and they include things like Harry Kane gets dropped into this attacking lineup, and there's all these very talented forwards that can hold the ball really well in the attack. And they drop him in, and it's almost like an alien. It's almost like for the last 12 months, the Nagelsmann and Tuchel tried to teach this team to play without a number 9, and then they're dropping back a number 9, and they had a ton of chances without Kane, and then Kane comes on. This is not Kane's fault. I don't want to misinterpreted that this is Kane's fault, right? But he gets dropped in, and everyone is like, so what do we do now? So it kind of felt like that. Like, people all of a sudden were playing crosses rather than doing run-ins, whereas before they did run-ins, right? Like, it just seemed so, the chemistry is just not there. And you know what? This is going to take some time. It's going to take some time for this team to learn to play with a proper number 9, especially a number 9 like him, right? Because he's a different player than Lewandowski in many ways. He's a world-class player, but he's not Lewandowski. I think that needs to be clarified as well. He brings a lot more heft to the game. He's a lot more forceful. He's a lot more used to this. He's not used to do more when you look at his heat map because of his time at Tottenham. So I think both sides will have to do some adjustments here. So he's being treated like this messiah that he cannot be, and that's not his fault. But I just want to really underline this, and I think that is something that's also some of the takeaways. But I always want to talk about Leipzig a bit more here, Stefan, because there's a lot of really positive takeaways here, and good reasons for why I think that they are the team that could seriously challenge for the title. And one of the 3, as we have established before the show, right? And it's the fact that they have this. Simmons looks like a player that Bayern desperately needs. He looks like a player that can connect defense with midfield. He is able to transition the ball through from the back of the field to the offense so quickly, which served them so well when they had to sit deep against Bayern, right? It felt like, although Bayern had a ton of chances, it felt like that Leipzig was actually the more dangerous team, because whenever they did get the ball and whenever they did transition the ball forward, all of it felt like every time it could be a goal, right? And I think that they were quite clever putting together this team, but I think they have all the weapons too to also go to, let's say, Mainz, right? And dominate that team as well. I think they have all the elements of doing that as well. It just felt like, while Tuchel said that his team looked like a team that hadn't been doing anything for 4 weeks, Marco Rose's team looked like a team. It looked like they had the pieces, they identified the pieces that they needed. Max Eber went out and got them. They added another center back as well, Lukeba, right, who's extremely talented. They feel like a team, and I feel like they're going to hit the ground running, which is so different from this Bayern team.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had some thoughts about it after the game, and I was kind of thinking to myself about how quickly, this team has begun to look like a team, and I thought, well, I guess it makes sense, because this is kind of what Marco Rose had to do last season. He was parachuted into this club when things were all over the place, and he did quickly turn things around, and he got them playing like a team very quickly. And I guess that's one of his main skills as a head coach. Yeah, and I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I thought defensively they were perfectly sound. Considering the fact that they've lost Guardiola, but the fact is Simikan can slot straight in there alongside Orban and do a really decent job. I was really impressed with Henriks as well at right back. He did a great job. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I saw a lot of people kind of smirking at Timo Werner and the way he was missing chances or whatever else, but just the workload that he offers and just the kind of outball that he offers. I think I saw during the kind of broadcast, the percentage of where Leipzig were kind of moving the ball, and it was dominant down that left-hand side throughout the match, really, which I guess makes sense because Simmons is going to drop inside, Dani Olmo's going to float around the middle of the park, so Timo Werner to an extent was their kind of outball almost, and like the team kind of played off him. And then to have someone like Sesko come on, who I thought looked like a young player full of confidence when when he eventually came on for Timo Werner later on in the game. And so yeah, you're absolutely right. They do have an abundance of talent to rival last season's squad, maybe surpass it. And maybe they also have a head coach who has the kind of experience and capacity to kind of stitch that team together and make them play very well. And I kind of said this at full time that even though the Super Cup doesn't really mean anything in terms of it's not a trophy, it's not a cup final of sorts, but it's a game in which Bayern wanted to win, and it's a game in which the fans all arrived. The sheer mayhem around Kane joining the club, and as you kind of reported, just the amount of like the mayhem of people running around with Harry Kane shirts on and things like that.
It's
the fact
insane.
That Leipzig, yeah,
absolutely insane.
The fact that Leipzig showed up and said, no, we're going to spoil this party, it's great experience for them. It gives them an abundance of kind of confidence to say, right, well, in the Bundesliga we can do exactly the same thing, because it's not as if Bayern weren't trying to win that game. It wasn't as if they didn't take it seriously. It was a serious game in that regards, and Leipzig got the better of them. So yeah, I don't know. I was really impressed with Leipzig, and going into the new season. And to kind of maybe transition away from this game and maybe to the Bundesliga itself, I think it's really interesting. If you look at Bayern's kind of opening fixtures, they've got two, I'll say, relatively easy games to kick things off. They've got Werder Bremen away, and then they play Augsburg at home, who've just been knocked out of the Pokal. So, they're also...
Bremen too.
Yeah, sorry, of course. So, two teams
Both
there
of them, yeah.
Yeah, two teams who probably won't put up much of a fight. But then they play Gladbach, who, Bayern obviously had a history there with. They play Leverkusen, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Bochum, okay, fair enough, it's a game they should be winning. And then they play a Pokal midweek game before travelling to Leipzig. So, in the first kind of 6 league games, they've got 3 really big hurdles. And if I had any concern over Bayern winning the league this season, sorry, I've also just realised they play Freiburg right after Leipzig, so you could argue 4 of their first 7 games are matches which they could easily drop points in. So if I had any concerns over this Bayern team going into this season, it wouldn't be on paper, it wouldn't be the talent they have, it would be the fact that Tuchel just doesn't really, he still hasn't figured out what to do with his team. And because he's Thomas Tuchel and this is how he does things, it's almost like he tries to work these things out in public, in front of the media. He riles players up, he riles up the media, he riles fans up. And, if Bayern haven't yet figured out what to do, if Tuchel still can't get the best out of the squad, there's nothing to really suggest that they're going to be much better than last season, aside from the fact that they'll have Harry Kane scoring goals. Kim probably offers more than Upamecano, but I don't know. I still kind of feel like there's a lot of issues brewing under the surface here with Bayern, and that performance against Leipzig doesn't give me a huge amount of confidence going into the new season.
One final thought on Bayern, just to underline what you said there before we rope in title candidate number 3. Joshua Kimmich, after the game, made some very dismissive comments to the waiting journalists. He came into the room and when we asked him to speak to us, he said, "I've already told lots of stories to the journalists over there, right? Like, so pointing to the field where he spoke to the rights holders. He has to speak to them." And then it's like, oh, and I actually said, "Well, you haven't told us anything yet." So it's like, "I have told you guys lots of stories the last few weeks as well," and just kept walking, in obviously foul mood. And I spoke to some colleagues that cover the team full time, and they have been mentioning that Kimmich has been in a very explosive mood over several weeks now, mostly to do with the fact that Thomas Tuchel has gone out in public and said that he's not a number 6, right? And that doesn't bode well when one of your players that is supposed to be one of those new leaders in the dressing room is kind of being pushed aside a little bit, right, by the head coach. And as well, of course, by this new player arriving, Harry Kane. Harry Kane is not at Bayern to not be a leader. He's the captain of the English national team, Stefan. Like, what is going to happen when you drop this personality into the room? I have no problem. I don't think Harry Kane will have any issues, but there will be some players that will probably drop down in the hierarchy now, right? I mean, just look at Thomas Müller, how he has embraced Kane already. There was photos shown today where the two of them played kipi-appis together, and they already have arranged a golf session together. I mean, if you Kimmich, you look at this and you're like, well, I guess that's me down the hierarchy further, right? And that shows to me that there's a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors that is going to be great for you and me because we can cover it. It's not going to be great for results.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of what I'm talking about in the sense that, and these were concerns that were kind of broached at the time when Thomas Tuchel was appointed as the Julian Nagelsmann's replacement, in the sense that, if you were trying to bring in a head coach to kind of steady the ship after, Julian Nagelsmann's perceived inability to, win the whole squad round, shall we say, is Thomas Tuchel the guy to do that? Because he's got an experience at Dortmund, he's got experience at PSG, he's got experience he's got stories at Chelsea. Yes, he brings success, but that success also comes with consequences, and the consequences is that he's very outspoken. He doesn't hide his frustration at all on the sidelines or in front of the cameras. And I mean, if you're a club like Dortmund, maybe, who were desperate for success, you can put up with that for a while. If you're a club like Chelsea, who are in a complete mess after sacking Frank Lampard, then yeah, you bring in Tuchel because he's a Champions League winner, and you just do what he says. But Bayern Munich just really aren't used to having head coaches who publicly berate players week in, week out. It's meant to be a happy family. It's all meant to be behind closed doors. It's all meant to be very gentlemanly, and yeah, I don't know. I can understand why some people are concerned about this, and it does kind of feel like a ticking time bomb of sorts. Of course, Bayern could go out and win against Bremen and Augsburg like 4-5-0 each, and by then beat Gladbach, and everyone forgets about these kind of things very quickly. But this has been a very frustrating summer for Bayern, and yeah, we'll just, I guess the proof will be in the pudding, because we'll see how they play in the Bundesliga.
I won't put too much weight into those first two results, to be honest with you. But I do think my what's always been the best coaches at Bayern Munich were not the ones that imposed themselves onto the squad, but that were almost just working in the background. This has been always a club where the players did a lot of the structure, putting the structure themselves in, right? And the best coaches didn't manage the squad, but kind of navigated it. And I think Thomas Tuchel is not the person to be able to do that. So there's an early prediction for me right there. I think this is a time bomb that will go off at some point. But we do need to talk about Dortmund. Dortmund also featured on the weekend, and I think we're going to have 3 title candidates this season. And Dortmund, I was with them in San Diego and in Vegas, covered them quite closely, especially the San Diego part is where they actually had the training camp right ahead of the season. Was quite telling. And Stefan, I've been asked by a few people, including by people from the DFL, how that training camp went on. And, one of the big takeaways I have from my time being with Borussia Dortmund and speaking to quite a few of those players, and I mean, they covered it to great extent, both here at the Gegenpressing, but also Transfermarkt, right, where I put some profiles on these players up. I thought what really stood out to me, and Edith Terzic again actually said it today again, that they have a goal. They want to win the championship. And do you remember the last time Dortmund went into a season where they said, yeah, this time we want to make the final step and win the title? I don't think I ever remember that.
Yeah, and we have talked about. I think we talked about this when you did that. We did that deep dive into Dortmund, and potentially how we're seeing the kind of culture of the club change under Sebastian Kehl, and obviously the head coach as well, who's, as you mentioned just there, is extremely driven, and it is a kind of change. And I think I kind of referenced how it's almost like a generational change in a sense that the previous generations of Watzke and Michael Zorc and whoever else were there at the darkest days when the club were on the brink of bankruptcy, and everything they had done and continue to do today, Watzke will still quite happily reference those dark days whenever he's referring to financial figures at the club and how much they spend and how much they have for wages, etc. He'll always say, look, we have a responsibility to be financially fiscal because of what happened in the past. And how it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not going to regurgitate that entire episode, but we basically said it's interesting how that's something that hangs over him, where someone like Sebastian Kehl, who was a player and obviously would remember those times, but it's not something that's attached to him. So he can come in as this new sporting director or director of sport, whatever he is, and look at it with a fresh set of eyes and say, no, you know what, we're Dortmund, we really should be trying to challenge for the title here. And if that means we have to go and sign some players, then we will. And I think the best way of kind of talking about Dortmund ahead of this league is just to draw the comparison to the conversation we just had about Bayern Munich there. Bayern's summer has been one of frustration, has been one of public spats. We didn't even talk about Benjamin Pavard, who is very publicly and very openly apparently talking about wanting to leave the club, but is their only first choice right back at the moment. But anyway, we will not talk about Bayern anymore.
Not this episode anyways.
No, yeah. You look at that Dortmund team, and I think one of the really maybe underrated things that Terzic has managed to do in this squad is the way he's managed to convince a lot of the older players to kind of step aside or gracefully kind of diminish. You look at Marco Reus giving up his captaincy this summer. That was done very professionally, and it was all done very tastefully. You compare that to the fiasco the club Bayern are dealing with Manuel Neuer right now, because they don't know how to deal with his succession. Mats Hummels is another one who perhaps did it about a little earlier than that, and it feels like things are kind of coming together for Dortmund. I watched their game, their Pokal match against Schott Mainz, and look, it was a very easy tie for them. They're obviously playing a minnow. And in a way, it kind of looked like a kind of preseason friendly, without being too disrespectful to their opponents. But I just found it really interesting, the manner in which you had someone like Ryerson firing up the wing, in a sense that he's looked like he's been at the club for years. Benza Baini played very well on the left. Sabitzer slotting straight into that central midfield role where Jude Bellingham played and doing a great job of it. And then even like Daniel Malin and Sebastian Haller just playing really fantastically well. And I don't know, it just feels to me like Dortmund have really benefited from having a nice, quiet, you know, efficient summer where, you know, they knew they were going to lose Jude Bellingham. They've managed to get some really impressive signings in, and there's not really a huge amount of drama or issues around the club at all. And sure, there'll be a lot hang up as to how the season finished last year. I know you spoke to a few Dortmund players this summer about it, so you know it's not something they're ignoring by any means. But
No, quite the contrary. They're actually addressing it full on, right?
yeah, yeah. So I mean, the only thing that concerns me a little bit is still that back line. I mean, the shot Mainz goal came about from a cross which Hummels mishits. Hummels in fails to clear. It clips his foot, which then rebounds off of Benzibaini's face and then goes, and then, you know, a nearby opponent knocks it in. And it's the kind of calamitous defending that Dortmund have become famous for in recent years. So there's still that kind of chink in the armour. There's still that kind of weak underbelly in defence, which is obviously probably why they're now looking to bring in an essential defender before the window shuts. But I think all that considered, I think they're looking at a really decent place right now.
Yeah, I actually think that them going away to the United States and being completely isolated in a place like San Diego, which is, by the way, beautiful. Their hotel that they were staying in was gorgeous too. I actually think did them quite a world of good, where they could just sit together and work through what happened on match day 34. And as I alluded to, they were quite open about it, right? When we asked questions, there was no like, oh, we don't want to talk about this anymore or any of that. You know, the usual stuff that players say. They're saying like, yeah, it hurt. And every single player told us exactly how they dealt with it. And every single player then said like, but the one thing that we want to do right away is to correct it. They didn't perceive it as this once in a lifetime opportunity. And I think that's probably the best way to deal with it, to be honest, to learn from it. It kind of reminded me a little bit of how Bayern dealt when they lost the final at home, you know, the big final in the Champions League against Chelsea. And they haven't really lost a game since, it feels like it. You know, they went on this burner to win 11 Bundesliga titles in a row, and they have won the treble twice since. An experience like that can do something with a club. And I wonder if this might have actually, you know, this sounds harsh, but this might have actually been a good thing for Borussia Dortmund in some ways to have this experience. And I think that Sebastian Kehl did some very good things this summer. I think Marcel Sabitzer is exactly the player that they needed to fill that role. I think Felix Mencher looks like a really good addition as well. Obviously, the club had to deal with some off-field issues there, but it seems like they have gotten that sorted, right? And yeah, I think Sebastian Haller is a new addition for them as well, pretty much. And he looked extremely fit in the training camp, and I think in the match as well, like in the Pokal, right, Stefan? So yeah, I'm really excited to see them and see how they come into the season. And of course, they're starting their season against Cologne, right, on Saturday. And I think that's a fixture that they have to win right away.
Yeah. I should say as well, like, again, you have to kind of take these with a pinch of salt because it's a lower league cup game. But I thought Sebastian Haller looked really, really sharp. You know, not just in terms of getting on the end of crosses or finishing chances, but just how nifty he was on the ball, how much he was able to shift his weight, how much he was able to kind of play other players in. Mukuku, again, also came on and he looked really sharp. It definitely wasn't the kind of quality that they'll be expected to play against, and you could tell because, you know, they were getting like 2 or 3 touches in the box, whereas, you know, a Bundesliga opponent would be in their face immediately. But I think it was really encouraging just to see that. And, you know, my newsletter this week will be on Dortmund and looking behind the numbers as to where they can actually challenge again, I guess is the word, and win the trophy and the league title this year. But the sheer fact that they have all these players fit and able to play, the fact that Haller looks top of his game, I think Daniel Malin as well in particular, just having him with some confidence could be a real game changer for Dortmund. And again, and you know, I haven't even mentioned him really, but I thought Sabitzer was great. He scored. He could have scored 2 or 3. He's already taken on that role of responsibility in the middle of the park, which, as we talked about when Jude Bellingham left in the kind of transfer shows of the summer, more than just about any technical ability, Dortmund needed someone who could step into Bellingham's leadership role in that team, and I think Sabitzer is a great sign in that regard. I think he could go down as one of the most kind of underrated signings in all of European football this season. If you look at the amount of money that's been spent on central midfielders, particularly in the Premier League, and the fact that Dortmund picked him up for a bargain, I think that could end up being a really impressive signing. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of like challenging for the title, I've got no reason to see why Dortmund can't step up a gear and move on from last season. I think it's worth bearing in mind that they were so poor towards the start of last season that despite that really impressive second half of the season, I think they only finished maybe 1 or 2 points above the previous year's points total, if that makes sense. So from one season to another, technically they didn't step up a bit, but if you want to gauge it by January this year onwards, then they certainly showed that they could go toe to toe with Bayern week to week, and unless there's any huge debilitating injuries in that team, I think they should be pretty well set, to be honest with you. There's still maybe some concerns as to how Sabitzer and Emre Can slot together in terms of against a Schott Mainz or a lower league team. It's fine to have just two central midfielders and allow someone like Marco Reus to play number 10, but in the Bundesliga they'll probably need a third central midfielder in there most weeks, and how they make that work might be a concern, because I think they maybe still need another central midfielder there. But yeah, we'll see how they get on. But I'm very encouraged by Dortmund's summer and the signings, and the fact that a lot of players who hadn't been playing well suddenly are kind of clicking into gear now.
Yeah, no, and that's our 3 title contenders, right? And I think from what we've seen, especially from Bayern Munich this weekend, I think there is a challenge. There's a possibility that we actually see a race for the title by 3 teams. Now, of course, there's the next group of clubs, and that's your Union Berlin, Freiburg, Leverkusen, Eintracht Frankfurt, Wolfsburg, maybe Stuttgart, Stefan. But when we looked at this group of clubs, and these are the teams that will maybe, there's one free Champions League spot, right? And then there's the 2 Europa League spots and the Conference League spot. But when I look at these groups of teams, and I've seen especially what Leverkusen did, and they have the most exciting head coach prospect, is it too far to say that Leverkusen could maybe be put in that title challenger category, or is it still too early to say that? I mean, I'm struggling a little bit. Obviously, it'd be great if Leverkusen can join Bayern, Dortmund, and Leipzig in that category, because it means the league is wide open. But Leverkusen still feel like it. Of course, the history also suggests this, right? But it's always so damning whenever you suggest that Leverkusen could be a title challenger. But their summer was so good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this rate, the only thing that could really derail Leverkusen's season is if Xabi Alonso ends up moving to Bayern Munich.
Oh, yeah.
Which probably looks just about as likely as any of their other star players moving on at this point. But no, yeah, you're absolutely right. We did a kind of deep dive on Leverkusen as well. I'm only bringing up these episodes because a lot of people, this is the first time they've listened to us in a while, and if they want to go back and check, then please do. And basically we mentioned the fact that not only are Leverkusen bringing in impressive players this summer, but they're also bringing in experienced players. Jonas Hoffmann knows exactly how to get stuff done in the Bundesliga. He's an experienced international. He's one of the best wingers in the league in last season, in my opinion. Granit Xhaka arrives with a huge amount of expectation and confidence and responsibility, which I think Leverkusen have been missing in the centre of the park for a long time. That kind of defensive number 6 role for Leverkusen has been an issue for quite some time. Maybe number 6, maybe more of a number 8 role actually. And then obviously someone like Grimaldo as well at left back's another experienced player. So I like that they're kind of this summer, instead of kind of just plucking in our 3 or 4 youngsters from South America and just kind of hoping it works, they're obviously trying to build something with purpose. And I don't think it's a coincidence that's because Xabi Alonso's at the helm, that he probably wants to win something, that he wants to do something with Leverkusen that he can stamp on his CV take to the likes of Real Madrid or Liverpool or Bayern Munich one day. I don't think that's too disrespectful to Leverkusen to suggest. And, I think if you compare it to the fact that so far they've only really lost one big star player in Moussa Diaby, who I think if you were to lose between him, Frimpong, and a Tapsoba or even a Florian Wirtz, I think Diaby's maybe the most replaceable one out of the four of them. So yeah, I think off the pitch they've done a really great job. We just kind of have to wait and see what happens on it now.
Yeah, Sepp was here for the Super Cup. Sepp Staffordblom, good friend of the podcast, right? Writes for The Athletic on the Bundesliga. I spent quite a bit of time with him this last few days. Obviously, sorry Sepp for mentioning this, but I was right about Harry Kane last October. Should have shut him. Just want to put it in one more time. But anyways, he mentioned to me, this is another number 9, Victor Boniface. Because he did go to the training camp of Leverkusen, and he told me that he was really impressed with Victor Boniface as a striker, Stefan. They picked him up from Union. Oh my God, this is the club that I can't pronounce, from Belgium anyways, for 20.5 million euros. And he looks like the real deal. He looks like a striker that, if Patrick Schick doesn't get on, could really make a difference for Leverkusen. This upcoming season, and that's a big deal, isn't it? Like, having a number 9 seems to be like every Bundesliga club wants one, and they went out and got exactly the right one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's probably one of the few kind of players they brought in this summer who does kind of slot into that kind of young, potential star role, which is absolutely fine, of course, because if you kind of look at the attacking options that Leverkusen should have to hand, you're right, it's few and far between. Patrick Schick still has his injuries, and there's no kind of guarantee that should he or when he does return, he'll be the same player, because if you kind of look back over the course of his career, he's been very hot and cold from one season to the next. I actually wrote a newsletter on that last year, actually. And then there's Sardar Azmoun, who's actually injured at the moment. But after that, you're really struggling. You can play someone like an Adam Hosek in there, but I think he's maybe more of a number 10 or a second striker rather than a number 9. And that's exactly why they need someone like Boniface in there. Hopefully he can stay fit. Hopefully he can start and score goals for him, and maybe he kind of fixes that kind of remaining piece of the puzzle for Leverkusen. And we're here once again, Manu. I feel like we do this every year, where we look at this Leverkusen team and think, wow, they could actually do something. We haven't even mentioned the fact that Florian Wirtz is still at the club, and for the first time in a long time is healthy. It's had a full pre-season, and is probably raring to go. And if you want to compare that to the way Jamal Musiala played on Saturday night, you wonder if this might be the season in which he kind of tussles with Musiala for the kind of role of Germany's most impressive young player. So yeah, they've got all the talent to comfortably, I think, challenge for the top 4. Whether they can kind of make the step up and challenge for the league will be really interesting, because that's kind of perhaps where Xabi Alonso will kind of earn his wages, because not only does he come in as a tactician, but he brings that experience, doesn't he? He brings that assurance to say, look guys, here's how you challenge for league title, because with all due respect to Leverkusen, they don't really have that culture at the club of challenging for league titles. There's not really a huge amount, there's not a back catalogue of ex-pros kind of walking in and out the changing room, giving their advice of how Leverkusen won the league back when, even the people running the club these days are the same. So Alonso's kind of potentially the person who can provide that mental leg up, if you will, and almost like teach Leverkusen how to believe in themselves and to challenge for a league title. And it'll be interesting to see if he can. My only issue is that, as we talked about that kind of striking position, their squad's not as deep as the 3 we've already mentioned on this episode. And if a Wirtz gets injured, if a Hoffman gets injured, if a Boniface or a Frimpong get injured, there's no one there to kind of step into that role for more than 2 or 3 weeks, and then that's what's happened over the last couple of seasons. They've always had big injuries that have caused huge issues for them, and we'll have to wait and see if that's what happens this season or not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Leverkusen is going to be the super interesting one. And then, of course, there's this group. Um, and I'm going to group them Union Berlin, Freiburg, and Wolfsburg. And maybe even Stuttgart, Stefan, because Stuttgart under Hoeneß, they were what, the fourth best team in the Bundesliga over the last 8 match days last season. They have done some very interesting things. Um, Frankfurt is,
Are you seriously trying to shoehorn Stuttgart into this episode?
no, I'm just wondering what's the group of teams that we can seriously considering perhaps challenging for like the European spots, and I think all of them are in there. But I assume we're thinking Leverkusen will finish in the top four, right? Like the way the season's
Yeah, yeah,
been,
yeah,
or
yes.
do we think Union Berlin and Freiburg are going to be doing what they did last year? I mean, Union Berlin has been interesting. Their transfer season has been, for lack of better term, spectacular. Um, we're going to have to maybe talk about them a bit more tomorrow in the bonus show. But if they bring someone like Bonucci home and sign Gosens, and I mean, they do this every year. They sign like an army of players, and the ones that don't work out, they just discard or sell with a profit. But I mean, Union Berlin were better every year since they got promoted, which now has ended them playing the Champions League this year. I mean, the only thing that tops last year is the German Championship. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but are they still a top four side? Is I guess what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, we would be foolish to kind of discount Union Berlin. They continue to dumbfound expectations. They continue to kind of prove that they're better than the sum of their parts. I watched their kind of cup against Waldorf, and they were really impressive. Again, another game in which they're up against weaker opposition, but it was a game in which we saw like an array of forward players just playing off each other very well. They've obviously still got Becker, who we all thought was going to leave this summer, but hasn't. Behrens has done. I thought he was extremely useful in that game. He didn't get a goal, but he set up a lot of chances. A lot of players play off him. Fofana, the young player they've picked up on the young striker they picked up on loan from Chelsea, was also very impressive. And I think they've just got a really good squad of kind of dependable players that Urs Fischer now knows that he can rely on. They're very good at kind of building plans so that these players don't burn out. And yeah, I mean, their squad is humongous. It's obscene. They're kind of like the Nottingham Forest of the
Yes, they
Bundesliga,
are.
in a sense, except Union seem to know what they're doing, which I'm not quite sure Nottingham Forest do. But yeah, they've got so many players. They've got I think they've maybe got 5 or 6 forwards, across those 3 positions. They've brought in a number of kind of central midfielders as well. Toussaint's coming from Hertha, who you could totally see kind of eventually turning it on under Urs Fischer. And yeah, you're right, Bonucci. Bonucci would be a perfect kind of Union signing. We'll talk about him again on the transfer show tomorrow, but I absolutely think Urs Fischer's team will be up challenging for the top 4, and for me it's between them and Leverkusen really for that 4th spot. And I mean, if I had to put my money on it, I'd probably put it on Union over Leverkusen right now, because Union have proved that they know how to last the distance and go the distance and over the course of an entire season, and they're not as dependent on individual players as Leverkusen are.
Yeah, 31 players in that first team squad at the moment. You're not wrong. That is a humongous squad. And they're not finished yet, right? If they add Gosens and Bonucci, that'd be 33.
Yeah, and I mean, we joke, but they could literally put out 2 starting 11s most weeks, which is just something that I think is really impressive.
But you know what? They have to, the way they're playing. We saw that last year. Their style of play is so taxing. And if it wasn't for that World Cup break, they probably wouldn't have finished top 4, right? Because they got that extra break. So they have to find a way to play this kind of football without having a massive break this year. And I guess having 33 players under contract will do it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. So, I mean, it's always quite hard to kind of pick individual players out for Union Berlin, because they are such a wide squad, and they really are better than the sum of their parts is the best way to describe them. But I mean, maybe they might get a little derailed by the kind of extended European calendar they'll have this summer or this season. But Yeah. If there's one thing I've learned over the last kind of 4 or 5 years in German football, it's never bet against Urs Fischer and Union Berlin.
Yeah, I mean those nights at the Olympiastadion will be magical in the Champions League. I have no doubt that all three games will be sold out, 75,000, and the Olympiastadion is a big event stadium. When that stadium is full, it is a magical place. It's one of my favorite venues. I love doing the German Cup every year, and the Olympiastadion is great for that. I'm sure that Union Berlin, they will fill it to the roof and beyond. And it's going to be a really great venue for that. And it's going to be interesting to see how it impacts their campaigns. And I guess now the question then is, so Union Berlin and Leverkusen are maybe the teams that will challenge for their fourth Champions League spot. We mentioned Freiburg, Frankfurt, and Wolfsburg, and then there's always a surprise team, right? I already threw Stuttgart out there, but I assume those teams, Freiburg, Frankfurt, and Wolfsburg, will be the teams fighting for those other European spots, Stefan. Wolfsburg have done quite a few interesting things this summer as well. We already spoke about them last week. Frankfurt are in this weird state of flux because of Kolo Muani. Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? Who's going to come in to replace him? I actually personally think this is the summer to sell Kolo Muani because you probably won't get 100 million euros for him next year. But, it leaves them in this weird kind of vacuum between, this is not quite a finished product yet. And there's a lot of question marks around these teams. Can Freiburg repeat what they did last year, for example, right? That's a really big question too. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. I kind of have quite a lot of confidence in Freiburg just because they haven't really lost any kind of huge names, to be honest with you. I know Flecken's obviously moved off to Brentford, but I think they've obviously brought in Muller there to kind of step in there, so I think that's going to be okay. Kevin Schade obviously completed his move to Brentford as well, but he wasn't really a dependable key star, if you will, before he left, so it's not a huge loss for them to a large extent. They've brought in Junior Adamu from RB Salzburg, who picked up a lot of goals in Austria last year. He could be an impressive player for them.
A really good player.
Yeah. I think as long as Freiburg don't lose anyone, I think they'll be absolutely fine. I think they really grew into the season. I think this is what Christian Streich does. He's just very good at rebuilding squads, and I think we're in the process of. They obviously have up and down seasons because he builds up a squad, they do very well, then they get picked apart, and then they have 1 or 2 seasons in mid-table, and they do it all again. And I feel like they are currently, riding the crest of the wave, if you will, or on the ascendancy. So I think they will be a top 6 side. I'm not quite sure whether they'll be able to challenge for the top 4. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in my personal opinion, between them, Wolfsburg and Frankfurt, I think there's very little between them. I kind of caught the highlights of the Frankfurt game, and I think they opened the scoring with a Kolo Muani shot, which was almost like a cross, which the goalkeeper actually knocked into his own net. And I thought, well, that's a good omen for this coming season, that goalkeepers are throwing the ball into the back of the net for Kolo Muani. We'll have to kind of wait and see what he does. But Frankfurt have just had so much upheaval this summer, even looking aside from Kolo Muani. They've got a new head coach in. They've got a huge amount of players that have arrived at the club. And they've also lost quite a lot of key players as well. A lot of them for free, unfortunately. Kamada and Dika, Sov's obviously moved on to Sevilla as well. So I think Frankfurt are going to have something of a transition season, to be honest with you. Probably the same for Wolfsburg, who, I do like Niko Kovac at Wolfsburg, and I actually kind of predicted they'd finish in the top 6, I think, last season, pushing for top 4. That might be a tall order for them this year, considering the players they've lost. So I think it's probably between those 3 clubs to be challenging for those kind of 5th, 6th, and 7th roles. Under the likes of Union and Leverkusen, alongside I guess Mainz as well. But I think there's very little between those clubs really.
Yeah, I mean, I just know that one of those teams will have an off season because that's usually how it is, right? We don't have the same 7 teams finishing in the top 7 in the Bundesliga every year. and that kind of makes me wonder, like, who's going to be the team that is going to come in and kind of reshuffle the deck a little bit. Frankfurt is I have such a hard time reading them. I wrote in the remember when I did the DFB Pokal final, one of my thoughts on Frankfurt was, is this the end of an era, and is that transition coming, right? I think it's a good opportunity for them to play in the Conference League, because I think it's a competition they can win, which would then give them European football next year, and then you can have it wouldn't be the end of the world if you finish somewhere in the middle of the pack in the Bundesliga. Mainz is an odd one for me too. Like, I think they overperformed a little bit last year, and they are that typical ninth place team, and that makes you wonder, like, what do you see from before we wrap this up? Because I think there is going to be a surprise team in the top 9, and there's going to probably be a surprise team in the bottom 9, because that is the way, right? There's always one team that all of a sudden plays a really crappy season and finds themselves in a place where they don't want to be. But I guess that list of teams really only can include Gladbach, Hoffenheim, Stuttgart. I can't see any of the other teams playing a season where you can say, oh, wow, I can't believe they finished 6th or 7th.
Yeah, maybe a Hoffenheim, but yeah, it's a tough order, and yeah, I mean, I guess we'll talk a bit more about this in terms of in the second show, which we do later in the week, but I think we are kind of beginning to see, and we've seen it over the last kind of couple of years, and certainly saw it last year, where there is almost like an established kind of top 6, 7 or 8 clubs that are beginning to kind of cement themselves at the top of the table. We've seen that with kind of Frankfurt getting their act together, Freiburg are doing well, Union Berlin have kind of established themselves really as a top 6 sides, and once you consider the fact that Leipzig, Dortmund and Bayern are always going to be in the top 4, then that doesn't leave a lot of room to kind of wiggle around in, does it? So, I mean, I guess you could argue that the reason that there's not really any standout minnows who could overperform is because there's already 2 in Union Berlin and Freiburg,
Yeah,
and
true.
I mean, Union Berlin are probably the most overachieving club in European football at this moment in time, if you consider where they've come from, their finances, their wage bill. Freiburg as well continues to kind of perform miracles, so it doesn't really bum me out a lot that maybe the top half and the bottom half of the league this season won't look that different, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, the order of the clubs will look different, obviously, but aside from maybe Gladbach, Stuttgart, then I'm not sure there's going to be a huge change between the top 9 and the bottom 9, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I know one team will surprise us. It's the way, but I guess you make a really good point, and I just looked this up on Transfermarkt just out of curiosity. And in terms of market values, the only team that is kind of outside of the top 9 as we predicted it is Freiburg, and the only team that isn't in the top 9 as we predicted is Gladbach. If you're a betting man, the market values do play quite a big role. Although I have to add that although Freiburg's squad value is lower than Gladbach's, the average value of a Freiburg player is higher than the average value of a Gladbach player. So I don't know. We'll see, I guess. But I think this pretty much wraps it up, Stefan. That's a longer episode.
We haven't given our predictions yet.
Well, oh God, I hate predictions. Can we just skip them?
Come on, people want to know. Let's do a top 4.
I hope you would forget.
Well, we can do them now, or we can do them on the Friday show. But now that people have heard,
do we have to say who's going to win the title?
Yes, of course we do.
Oh man.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, do it.
Okay, so in 4th place, I'm going to stick with Union Berlin. 3rd place, I'm going to stick with Leipzig. 2nd place, I'm going to stick with Dortmund. And 1st place, I'm going to stick with Bayern. So I'm not saying any changes whatsoever. I think it's going to be very tight. I think there's every chance that Dortmund could win this league this year. I think there's every chance that Bayern could implode this year. But I can't look beyond Bayern at this moment in time just because of one game and a tricky summer. I think they've got every capacity to overcome that.
Okay, so you pretty much mirroring my prediction, but because I'm a contrarian, I'm just gonna say something different with the caveat that I don't necessarily believe it. There's a podcast that I listen to, and they're one of the guys, when they do predictions, he's like, well, you just predicted that. Even though I agree with your prediction, I'm not going to make it because I need to predict something different. I do think that Bayern will win the title, but I'm actually going to say that Dortmund will do it this year. They're going to end it. Yes, it has to happen simply because you already took my pick away. I think there might be actually a way where Leipzig finished second ahead of Bayern third after 2 coaching changes and lots of drama. And then fourth, I think, is going to be Leverkusen, with Union Berlin finishing just outside in 5th place. But Union Berlin will still be in it because they dropped down into Europa League and then win the Europa League. There you have it.
Well, yeah, exactly. There you have it. Subscribers to the show can, of course, give us their predictions and leave comments on the Substack. And you guys can chat amongst yourselves. Let us know what you think of our predictions. And yeah, as always, I guess, if you don't subscribe to the show, we still appreciate you listening and offering your support that way. But if you want some extra content, always do consider taking a subscription out, and you get our newsletters and extra shows as well.
And we do also, whenever there is a set schedule, right? One newsletter one from you, one from me, the 2 extra podcasts. But we do also, when something big happens, cover that as well. A good example is Harry Kane and the DFL Super Cup, which was add bonus content. So we do that as well. But yes, we'll be back with more content this week. As always, this show is brought to you by BetOnline, and then we'll be back with more content this week. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Kein Ende in Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.